so I first want to say that I first met Rabbi Jachter when he was teaching my son at TABC. So we go back a while. And he just had this real interest in Jewish customs. And of course, he was still the rabbi at that point, also of the Sephardic congregation. And he really had this love of all the different Jewish experiences. And that's why when I saw this book, I said, we have to have it as part of our series, particularly as I'm going to read part of the introduction, don't worry, it's short, from the book, Bridging Traditions. The goal of Bridging Traditions is to broaden every Jew's perception of we to include all Jews. Every Jew should take pride in the practices of his particular subgroup. At the same time, however, every Jew should also feel a sense of oneness and unity with all Jews. And that's really what we're all about at the ASF Institute of Jewish Experience. So thank you very much for joining us today. Everybody's microphones and cameras are off. We'll see if we have time to invite you to. In the meantime, anybody who has questions or comments, Professor Perellis and I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So we'll be going through that. Will be a little bit of an interview rather than a formal presentation today. And hopefully we'll get some information, but I definitely do recommend everybody read the book. There's a lot in there, as you can see. And so without further ado, Professor Perellis.
Thank you very much. This is a real honor. I want to thank the ASF Institute of Jewish Experience and Dr. Joy Russi for this wonderful partnership with the Schneier program and our Diasporas program. And this book fits perfectly in the shared interest in an appreciation for the complexity and the richness of the Jewish diaspora and the way it's been transformed in the last few decades. And your book really, is at the center of all of that. So we're really, really honored to have you here. I want to give a formal introduction because many people know of you in many different ways. So you should just know some of the other really wonderful and important work you do, Rabbi. Rabbi Haim Jachter is a rabbi of the Sephardic congregation of Teaneck. I know it as Sharei Orah. He serves as a Dayan on the Beit Din of Elizabeth and has acquired an international reputation for excellence in the area of get administration, a very, very important area of halacha. He's also a teacher at Torah Academy, Bergen County. He's a member of the Rabbinical Council of America's Halacha Committee and chairman of its Igun Resolution Committee. He's frequently sought out to assist communities in establishing and managing their Eruv. If you live in Teaneck, as I do, you will sometimes see him walking around with all sorts of hardware and students.
Playing with the utility poles,
Yes, yes, it looks a little dangerous. It's good you have those students with you. And is the Rav Makshir of our own Eruv here in Teaneck. Rabbi Jachter's ordination is from Yeshiva University, where he also earned his master's degree in Jewish philosophy at Revel, which is where I teach, and so it's wonderful. But I know Rabbi, and many of you know Rabbi Jachter from his many books, not only on halacha but also on Tanakh. His frequent articles in different Jewish newspapers, specifically the Jewish Link, which is a real something to look forward to every Shabbat, and to see the way he deals with problems. But without any further ado, I want to get into this wonderful new book, and I have some general questions. We can get into some more specific questions. I know that the audience will certainly have questions, so I hope that we'll be able to get to a lot of this. So the first question is there a Sephardic approach to halacha? I'm asking a theoretical question, a big question, and you can answer it how you want to. Which I hope you'll answer everything as you want to.
An excellent question. First of all, I should say it's an honor to be with you. You are. I remember when you spoke in Sharei Orah, I'm thinking to myself, he's really smart. So that was a very, very good question. Is there anything that's Sephardic halacha? Well, the answer is yes. There are Sephardic traditions. And it's interesting, Sephardic tradition, Spanish tradition, because the two main authorities were born in Spain. The two primary, the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Karo. Yes, I think, without exceptions, I think you'd also say that I think there's a little bit more of a little bit of a softer approach. I had this sneaking suspicion of being, after 20 years of being of the Sephardic congregation of Teaneck, that all Jews regard Hashem as Avinu Malkeinu, as Hashem as our God and Hashem as our King. But the question is, where do you put the dagesh chazak? Where do you put the emphasis? I think the Ashkenazim, judging by an Ashkenazic Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that this is the emphasis is on Malkeinu, as opposed to as opposed to, you go to a Sephardic congregation for Yom Kippur, you think you're at a rock concert, Chatanu lefanecha rachem aleinu. I think the emphasis is on Avinu. And in the sense that I have in halakha, it's an overgeneralization, and not every single situation, but I think that generally tends to be a little bit more of a lenient approach, especially I think when it comes to personal status matters.
So you're saying, and what are the different, why is that the case? Is there a different approach to the sources? Obviously, everyone deals with the same sources, right? Mishnah, Gemara, the Gaonim, whether you're coming from France and Germany and Poland, or whether you're coming from Spain or Morocco or Iraq. So what is it? Is it that they're looking at different things? They read the text in a different way. Their concerns are different. And maybe like a concrete example to kind of show it, maybe from both angles.
Okay, let's give you an example with personal status matters. So, and I'm going a little out on the limb here a little bit. This is not in the book. This is a Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is oral law. You have the written law, you have the oral law. So it hasn't changed. And so I'll say here now, orally, you look in Rabbi Yosef in terms of who can marry who and eligibility to marry, which basically means eligibility to be part of the community. It's a very wide net. I don't know if there's any case of mamzerut that he was presented where he ruled that the person was actually a mamzer. Now I don't think he actually exclude, that's illegitimate. I don't think that he believes that the category doesn't exist, but I just think that in the many cases that he received from all over the world, especially towards the end of his life, I don't think he found any of them where they excluded somebody. He has cases where he is who could a Kohen marry, and he's not as lenient as with the issue of illegitimacy, but it is certain there's a wide there's a wider leniency than you'd find amongst his Ashkenazic counterpart. Say if you compare his counterpart in the early 21st century, the very early 21st century, very late 20th century would be, let's say, Rav Elyashiv. Rav Elyashiv was a lot stricter than Rav Yosef. So I sense that what's going on. Halachot Shabbat is a lot more lenient if you look in in Rav Yosef. Not in every single situation. Things call it as it is in many situations. But I think overall there tends to be a more lenient approach to Shabbat in his writings. Again, it's also very important to emphasize that Rav Yosef is not all from Sephardic. He's not the only Sephardic authority. The most important Sephardic authority in the last 100 years, for sure. But there are many others, and not everybody has the same approach as his. But many of them tend to be. I think, generally speaking, they tend to be more lenient than the Ashkenazic authorities.
Is there a sociological piece in the sense that someone like Rav Elyashiv, who's asking him the shilas, who's asking him the questions, are people within the Haredi world, and Maran Rav Yosef, everyone asked, anyone within the wider Sephardic world was asking, meaning the guy who, keeps Shabbat in a very rudimentary way, would ask this a question in the way, as opposed, as will someone who's in Kolo, right? So is that a piece of this that he saw?
No doubt you're correct. You're undoubted. There's no doubt in the world that you're correct. If you were to do a computer search on the writings of Rabbi Jachter and his family, my guess is the single most common phrase is a machmir tavo la bracha, hamekel yeshlo mal yismoch.
Two levels.
Right, two tiers. The one who wants to be lenient has what to rely on. The one who has to be strict should be blessed. I think it's a very beautiful approach.
Right. It allows for
everyone to find their place.
Right. And it creates a situation where people aren't holier than thou,
That's
to use
correct.
a cliche,
Right.
Right. If you wanted it, it's a personal thing. I have another somewhat theoretical question, or not really theoretical, but kind of more of a macro question, which is, did you in all these years, because you've been doing this kind of shuttling and bridging between these different streams, have you seen over time, certainly especially in the last 50 years, where because of developments in the land of Israel and communication, have you seen where Ashkenazi poskim take from Sephardi poskim and vice versa? Have you been seeing that there's kind of a mirroring or something of an awareness, even an awareness to quote someone who you wouldn't normally, 100 years before, it wouldn't, lo yale ala dat, right? You wouldn't even think of it. Have you seen any examples of that?
I see a lot in the Sephardic world, especially this generation from the Ashkenazim. I don't see it from the Ashkenazim. From the Sephardim, with Sa'arenu. Yeah, the Ashkenazic world is still, what I see is doesn't get the Ashkenazic world. I was interviewed by Headlines, very popular program by Rabbi David Lichtenstein, and he was asking me a question about Sfir Sa'omer. And he knew the sources really, really well, but all of a sudden I started, I started bringing up, well, Rabbi Jachter says, you're like, okay, he had no clue. I think that's part of the reason why I wrote it is to show, well, look, here, basically, if I could have made another title for this book, what I've learned in the last 22 years is being the rabbi of a Sephardic congregation. See, because how did I start out being the rabbi of the Sephardic congregation? How have I lasted for 22 years being the rabbi of a Sephardic congregation? I mean, as I'm a descendant of the Ramah, I'm as Ashkenaz as you get. I mean, I never taken a genetic test, but I would imagine it's going to come out. It would come out 100% Ashkenaz. How does it happen? Because I realized already on day one, the first day I got there, I said, I don't know anything. So once you realize you don't know anything, you're good. I like to joke whenever I tell a Sephardic rabbi like this, I get a big smile out of him. I said to him, what do you call an Ashkenazic rabbi giving a psak halacha, giving a halachic ruling for a Sephardic Jew? So they said, I don't know. I said, wrong. No, you don't get it. You don't have no sense. They think it's the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, and Rabbi Jachter, and maybe if they know a little more, they'll throw in the Chidah for no. It's a rich world. The Sephardic psak, and I'll say after 20 years, I know nothing like 20 years ago, but I know something at this point. A lot more to go.
So like you said, a lot of Ashkenazim don't know about that world. What made you get involved in the Sephardi world?
Okay, so the couple of things that made a difference in my life, and then and then in an ancestor of mine. So let's start with this. I remember I don't think I met a Sephardic Jew till I was a teenager. I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I'm in Brooklyn. I did not meet. I was in Ocean Parkway, I guess, in Avenue R. So I didn't. But in Brooklyn, went to yeshivas, went to Camp Marsha. I don't think I ever met a Sephardic Jew. I didn't know what a Sephardic Jew was. All of a sudden in high school, there were a couple of Sephardic Jews, and I was like, whoa, okay, I didn't, no idea. So, the influences were in my neighborhood. All of a sudden, somebody moved in and became very close to them. Actually, he's a very prominent doctor now, Dr. David Surur, and we learned together. I learned a lot from him. So that was very helpful. I spent the summer of 1984 participating in a yeshiva university program called Tchiyah, which is was outreach to neighbors. There, I was a heavy dose of Sephardic influence. I was in a Sephardic, predominantly Sephardic neighborhood. I learned Sephardic shuls, Yemenite shuls. That was really something. When I was in yeshiva in Israel, I was in Gush for 2 years. I had a Yemenite roommate, and also Rabbi Yehuda Sussman, who also is who was a classmate. All of a sudden, introduced me on a Friday afternoon. He said, "Get a load of this. Let's listen to the chief rabbi give a shiur on Friday afternoon on the radio." I said, "Whoa, he's good." His name was Rabbi Yosef. This is 1981. So that was my introduction to Sfar. But then I realized, and looking into my ancestry, so I descend from, my family makes a big deal about it, from Rav Gershon Kittver, who was the Baal Shem Tov's brother-in-law, and now, Rav Gershon Kittver, unlike the Baal Shem Tov, actually made Aliyah. And when he made Aliyah, he made his way to the Yeshivat Mekubalim Beit El in Yerushalayim. He was the only Ashkenazi that was ever admitted to this yeshiva. Yeah. This yeshiva Kabbalah still exists. It's by opposite the Ramban's Beit Knesset Ramban in the old city of Yerushalayim. And he made his way there. And who he made his way there from Poland? Who also made his way there from Yemen? Rosh Shalom Sharabi, the Rashash, the Sephardic Rashash, not the Ashkenazic Rashash. And they were learning together. They learned together. This Jew from Poland, this Jew from Yemen, they're sitting in Yerushalayim learning together in the 18th century.
Do you know what language they used?
I've often thought about that. My guess is they spoke in Arabic.
So he would learn, the Jew from Poland had to learn Arabic to get around.
I can imagine how else would he be able to manage in Eretz Yisrael?
Lashon HaKodesh, but the accent was.
Yeah, maybe. Apparently they communicated, but how else did he make his way? He must have. I think he learned Arabic. Look, it's not that hard to learn Arabic. If you know Hebrew and you know Aramaic, you're halfway there.
And you have no choice.
And you have no choice, right?
There's probably a mixture between the Aramaic and the Hebrew and the Arabic. I'm sure there was.
Yeah, correct. Between the three, they managed to communicate. But apparently they did. He's regarded till this very day, my ancestor, as one of the primary Talmidim of Rav Shalom Sharabi, which is amazing when you think about it. So it's in my, and apparently they say, my cousin actually went and spoke to the Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshivat Beit El Mekubalim, and he actually said that that his tradition that he has was that Rav Gershon Kittver, my ancestor, was an excellent Sephardic chazan. So I don't think I got that. I don't think I had that from his genes, but I'm pretty good for a weekday chazan. I'm pretty good. I'm fast, but yeah, I'm going to be in a.
That's the important thing.
To be a chazan, a Sephardic shul on the weekday.
That's right.
You have to know how to put the pedal in the metal. So that.
So, in your book, you talk about the concept of roommates in respect to mezuzah, and there's a lot. I mean, I'm married to a Yemenite, and so we always, there are these different issues. So, what kind of, if you can give us one or two examples of how you kind of bridge the traditions and how, especially people together, studying together.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Joy, because that just came up in Israel now. Israel, they're building a new building for the Ministry of Justice, and they had to decide, well, which kind of mezuzot are they going to put up? And they had a big building in Yerushalayim, and they had to put up 1,200 mezuzot. 1,200 mezuzot, and you don't have separation of religion and state in Israel. It's a Jewish state, so they put a mezuzot. So the government's paying for this. So it's interesting. They pose this to Rabbi Haim Jachter, to the Sephardic chief rabbi, and he decided, so he has to decide. Okay, Well, what are we dealing with? So, is the country, is Israel Sephardic? We know it's a Jewish state, but is it Sephardic or is it Ashkenazi? So you know what he decided? He decided that it is a, it actually is a, it is actually it is a Jewish state. It is neither Sephardic or Ashkenazic, therefore it should be half Sephardic and half Ashkenazic. Except for the you keep the mezuzahs on a slant or straight. Daddy said you should keep it straight because for Sephardim, at least the way the Yerushalmi Sephardim understand it, not the Moroccans, is a little different. Is that the Yerushalmi Sephardim understand the mezuzah as straight as a must, and the Ashkenazim as a slant as a preference. So therefore, the requirements of the must beat out the preference of the preference. If it's more important for the Sephardim, so all of them should be on on straight, but in terms of the actual writing, should be the Sephardic script or the Ashkenazic script slightly different. He said he should go half and half.
And so when people get married, what's your recommendation to them? I only follow the man, you give up all the women's customs. What's the
in theory you follow, you're supposed to follow the husband, but in practice it doesn't. I don't have to tell you, it doesn't work. You have to, like anything else, and you have to compromise. Look, my brother-in-law is married to my sister-in-law is Syrian. And my brother-in-law has learned how to make a really good Moroccan. I mean, it's just Syrian, but he makes a nice and good Moroccan Havdalah, and he does a good job with it. And okay, that's what you do. You have to find the blend. You have to find the blend.
I know we've been talking a lot and asking questions, so I do invite people to please either send in your questions or open your cameras and ask.
Yeah, please.
So I'm going to do that in the meantime, but
okay, we got, let's see, we got a question here.
You're reading it, I'm doing this.
Yeah, Rabbi Jachter, you see that question?
Yeah, something about love poems. I can't say I read that too much.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say one thing because it's something I do teach. It's a complicated question. It's a great question. And I don't know it's one of the things that scholars have real arguments about. What does it mean about the reality? It was common in the Islamic context and, to have those poems as well. So there seems to be some sort of sharing. But that's a great topic for another time. We can bring on some people who work on poetry more.
Well, actually, in 2 weeks, we're talking about poetry, right? Either next week or 2 weeks. I don't remember.
Okay.
But take a look at the website. And you have a question. Are there differences in the attitude to science?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Okay, so it's an interesting question. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. That's hard. I know Rabbi Jachter has a tshuva about spontaneous generation. That I also don't know. It's hard to to talk about like the current postscript with. Not enough data for me to analyze that.
Right. I mean, certainly.
Unfortunately, some of the more contemporary, or the 20th, 21st century Sephardic Rabbanim didn't really have much of a secular education, which I think was. I have my own thoughts about it. Even that, I'm not gonna. I have thoughts. As my mother would say, not everything you think should come out of your mouth. So I'm gonna nod to my mother. So we're gonna.
Yeah, I mean,
we are inviting you. Sorry, I just want to say we are inviting you all to please open your cameras so that we see we're not talking to a blank screen. We only have a few more minutes, but we do invite you to.
We had on Professor Tzvi Zohar. I think it was last year, right? This last summer, maybe, I think. And he's worked a lot on on modern, but modern meaning late 19th, early 20th century poskim and their approach to innovations and technology, it was very clear that their approach was very different than their European Ashkenazi counterparts, in the sense of embracing technology, not being, the question of using a electric light for a Chanukiah and saying, well, if it's a more beautiful light, why not? All sorts of rather surprising, also deferring to doctors, deferring to specialists, that sort of approach, which obviously is part of halakha across the board. I mean, that's not, right? I mean, personally, how the RCBC dealt with COVID, right? I mean, they brought in doctors, right? It's not, but
yeah, that's not the Mishnah says to do that. It wasn't a stroke of genius. It was just,
right. But
out the Mishnah.
It's only when you realize what other people might do, with a certain, the reactions to the Enlightenment brought about a lot of, aberrations, to be miyashiv, right, to kind of balance things out. That's my reading, but yeah, that I would recommend if someone to listen to to Professor Zohar's talk on that. That's some fascinating examples, and his writings on this is really important.
That's on our YouTube channel, and also
on the YouTube channel, yeah.
Rabbanit Shira Mervis gave a talk this past Sunday, and she'll do a follow-up this Sunday, talking about Rav Yosef Masas or Mashash. I'm not gonna.
Yes.
Here's another question about the mezuzah story. Doesn't the land of Israel have to follow the Shulchan Aruch? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, Rabbi Jachter would say that the Sephardim coming into, with different traditions. He said, the Yemenites, it's, we're going to hit home here, the Yemenites have been always following the Rambam to have meat all the 9 days. And you probably know, Dora, that Yemenites like to have their meat, you know what I'm saying?
I gotta tell you, my Hungarian father did too. That was a tradition.
I hear you. And 9 days, even the 9 days that they follow the Rambam, the Rabbi Jachter said that to follow Shulchan Aruch. That didn't go necessarily, didn't go over particularly well. Rabbi Jachter tried also to convince the Moroccans to give up their tradition. You should follow Dafka Shulchan Aruch, and okay.
You thought Ashkenazim should also follow the Beit Yosef?
No, but even Rabbi Jachter doesn't always follow the Beit Yosef. But give an example. At a Brit Milah, the Minhag Yerushalayim is to say Lach Niso B'Brito Shel Avraham Avinu before that Brit. Unlike the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so how do you explain that? There's an explanation for it, but Lama said they're not following the Shulchan Aruch. So this idea that everybody has to follow the Shulchan Aruch in Eretz Yisrael is, yeah, sort of. But this is Lama Ashkenazim are still permitted to be Ashkenazim. I'm hopefully. Well, so I'm going to be leaving very, very hopefully in a minute or two. I really have to. I think I have one more time for one more question because I'm flying to Israel and I'm going to be following. Yes, personally, I'm following Ashkenazi. I follow Ashkenazic practices. I'm the only one person in the world who says Slichot in Chodesh Elul and also does not eat kidneyot on Pesach. So there's got to be somebody, but that's me. So
they're more than you. They're more than just you.
Yeah, but the Lamas Ashkenazim can be Ashkenazim in Eretz Yisrael. That's what Rabbi. Yeah, that's Chacham Yitzchak about the mezuzot. I found it fascinating. I don't understand. Israel's been around. It's been 74 years. 74 years. They still can't figure out how to put them. But they're only now figuring out how to put them in the mezuzot in the government buildings. But okay, Akash.
I think each time it goes by the new government or the new.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, whatever. Interesting stuff. One last question, then I have
one last question. Let's hear from the audience. Someone has a question?
If anybody doesn't, I wanted to ask one more, but please, does somebody? Okay,
all right, you got it, and we'll end off with your question.
So, well, it's a kind of big one, so maybe I'll just kind of tweak it a little bit. So we were talking about the chief rabbinate in Israel, and we're talking about, and we weren't talking about, but there is the concept in Israel of nusach achid. You have a whole section in your book about tefillah and prayer and how to do it. And basically for the unified prayer service, a lot of the Sephardim, as I understand it, gave up and it became much more nusach Sfard based with that. So when somebody, if we just end with a practical one, when somebody goes to somebody else's synagogue, what do they pray?
Okay, so that's two different questions. Let's
I know.
turn
But
to
I
the
wanted to
question
start
at
in the
hand.
big one. It's too big.
Okay, and also shout out to your son Nathaniel. Okay, so we got okay, as a good guy, and I met your daughter in Oakland. So shout out to your daughter as well. We were a Shabbat table together. It was very nice.
Okay.
And but I just and to my student Tammy. Okay, Ronnie, right? Your wife, and so I have to give her a shout out. But so I just wanted to so nusach achid, that we should all be davening the same davening. So all the same prayer. So that's Rav Jachter, let's put it mildly, Rav Jachter hated that. So I always got to tell you, one of the nice everybody has that tradition, follow your tradition. You're gonna water it down. It's nobody. It's no good. So I think nusach achid, this idea of nusach achid, really never took off. And what do you do l'maaseh, like in places like in the army or the yeshiva? In the gush where I learned, so what's the rule in Shalvim, where my son learned what's the rule? The rule is dealer's choice, we like to call it in my day. Wherever the Shliach Tzibur is, he's a Shliach Tzibur, is a Sephardi, he's praised Sephardi, Ashkenazi, is Ashkenazi. It's that's l'maaseh how that's a compromise that's worked out. So and the Nusach Achid, I one of the beautiful things at Yeshiva University is that I had experience that I had there. I drove Rav Soloveitchik to the airport back and forth. I asked him about Nusach Achid. He hated it also. It was and that's why it didn't. And that's just putting it mildly. Oh, yeah, everybody should follow their tradition. Just to make an artificial conglomeration of both didn't work. It was tried, but Lama said it was low kabel. Now, what do you do if you're somebody else's shul? I would say like this. I always tell people that come to visit the Sephardim, use a Sephardic Siddur, because if you're going to be using an Ashkenazic Siddur at a Sephardic congregation without getting into the halacha, which I talk about in the book, but more than that, practically speaking, you will have no clue what's going on. If you are going to be in a Sephardic shul using an Ashkenazic Siddur, that is like using a map of Chicago to find your way in Manhattan. So it just doesn't make sense. So it's a little.
Now I feel bad. There was another quick question here.
Yeah,
sorry.
We'll sneak into one more question. I got to go to the airport. Yeah.
So the question is, my Italki great-grandfather's tefillin are knotted differently than Ashkenazi ones. So if you could just give like a 1 minute about differences in tefillin, and if it's a minhag or halacha.
Okay, so Italian practices are a world unto itself. I have not started. We don't have any Italian Jews in the. We have Jews who lived in Italy, but these were Syrian Jews that moved after the war, that moved to Italy. But we don't have any Italian Jews. I have not been forced to learn to start delving into Italian practice. Actually, Persian practice is my next frontier. I really have to start. A new book just came out on Persian minhagim, and that's something that I'm going to have to really start to conquer that. But I really don't know about the Italian practice. The tefillin is mostly the same. There are some differences, and without getting into the details right now. So as far as Persian tefillin should make sure it should be Sephardic tefillin. I just end off with the following. I want to emphasize the following. What's the most important thing I learned in 22 years of being a Sephardic congregation, and that is, I always ask people this: if you are thoughtful, if you are thinking Jew, and you come into and you're thinking Ashkenazic Jew, it comes to a Sephardic congregation. You're thinking Sephardic Jew comes to Ashkenazic congregation. What should strike you? What should you find staggering? The difference is you should not find staggering. What you should find staggering is the commonality. The fact that we've been so separate for so many years, and it's almost the same. I stepped when I was in 1984 in the Hatikva quarter of Tel Aviv, southern Tel Aviv, and next door was a Yemenite congregation. We prayed in the Yemenite congregation. The fact that it took me only a couple of days to adjust to be able to figure out what's going on. It's staggering. The families have been separated for thousands of years, thousands of miles, reunite. And there's a common language. We could my ancestor, Gershon Kittever and Rav Shalom Sharabi, learning together in Yerushalayim. How did they do that? They did it because Am Echad, we're one people. Our tradition has kept us one people, and that's what's going to continue keeping us one people is by continuing with our tradition. I want to thank you so much for having me on, and it's a pleasure. I have to run now to the land of Israel, Baruch, to the airport. Hopefully we'll should go well. And thank you to everybody for joining us, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Bye, Bye, everyone.
Caminos de leche y miel. Should have an easy trip.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that Spanish bracha. All right. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody.